Hi, good afternoon everybody. My name's Sophie Meany. I'm the Managing Director of Consulting Solutions at Amberjack. Hugely impressed to see so many of you here today, weather conditions, and even more impressed to see so many of you still here after lunch. I had a bit of a feeling that people might sneak off, so thanks very much for coming. Try to make sure it's a good investment of your time. I'm going to talk a little bit today about what are the specific characteristics of early careers recruitment and why do we at Amberjack get particularly excited about early careers recruitment. And I guess the premise of that is that we see it as a space where an awful lot of innovation happens. And we think that there's a lot of innovation going on in this space at the moment, even more than usual. And we're going to try and give you a little bit of a snapshot of some of the hints and tips and trends that we see in the market at the moment. Fundamentally, we're going to talk to you about, as Natasha said, making your recruitment processes more effective, more efficient, and more engaging for candidates. So just very, very quickly, for those of you who don't know us, who are we? What qualifies us to talk about this? We are Amberjack, and we are, just very simply, we are specialists in early careers recruitment. That's what we do day in, day out for all sorts of well-known organisations, and we do all manner of things within that space. So we have various technologies that underpin solutions. We manage recruitment processes, so we're a recruitment process outsourcer. We're also assessment design specialists, and have teams of occupational psychologists who design recruitment processes for our clients. So yes, every day we're talking about future talent, be that apprenticeships, be that interns, be that MBAs, be that graduates. All of that is very much our sweet spot. So graduate recruitment and campaign-led volume recruitment. When we're talking about early careers recruitment, what is the stuff that makes it, I suppose, such a defined space to focus on, and a space that we get particularly excited about? I've worked in recruitment all of my career, and personally have always found this portion of recruitment the most exciting, the most intellectually stimulating. And I guess the reasons why I think that are because within the early talent population, you actually have a lot of opportunity to do some really interesting process design. So I'm not an occupational psychologist, I'm a mock psych, not an oc psych, but I've always been fascinated in how you can introduce assessment tools and techniques which enable you to select in or deselect out the right or wrong candidates in high volume situations. And there's a very technical specialist subject matter, content-driven aspect of early careers recruitment. It's also hugely competitive. You know, when you're looking in the early talent space, you're talking about people who haven't really started on their career path yet, so arguably they could work for any organisation. All options are still open to them. And for those really high calibre individuals, most organisations are sitting there going, pick me, pick me. So actually, the need to differentiate, that sense of competition is really extreme, and that's also why it's really exciting. The other thing that excites me about future talent is the fact that we're assessing potential over experience, and that's an area where as HR professionals we can really add a lot of value. When you start to get to executive recruitment, and I've done a lot of that in the past as well, it becomes much harder as an HR professional to influence hiring decisions, because ultimately we can talk about behaviours, we can talk about tendencies and traits and preferences, but if somebody's been doing the job, then their technical expertise, their networks and things are going to have a really significant impact on the eventual outcome of the hiring decision. Whereas at that early talent space, as HR professionals, our expertise and our ability to identify potential and articulate people's future potential has a massive impact, and it's really important for an organisation that we're able to help them do that effectively. The other thing that makes it really, really exciting as far as I'm concerned, and I'm prepared to accept that I'm a future talent geek, is the fact that candidate experience really counts. Going back to that first point about the high applicant volumes and the high hire numbers, you're often dealing with very large numbers of people who, if you have a consumer brand, are not just your applicants but also your customers, and even if you don't, they're your future potential talent pool, and they're all individuals who may end up engaging with you as a prospective client or customer. So you have high volumes of people who need to walk away from your experience as promoters, not detractors of your brand. And that's a real challenge when you flip it back up to that high applicant numbers and high hire numbers, because when you're talking with experienced hire or lateral recruitment, it's a bit easier to have that one-on-one engagement. When you've got relatively fewer people coming through or applying for a role, you actually can engage with each of them on an individual basis. Whereas when you're dealing with hundreds or thousands of applicants, you have to be really smart and think really carefully about how you go about creating that positive experience and that it doesn't come across as impersonal. And trying to tread that line is it's basically what we spend all our time thinking about on a day-to-day basis. So I love this image. I think it's fascinating for a number of reasons. I think what it tells us is that as much as things change, other things stay the same. You know, the mediums in which we're all consuming content have changed significantly, but we've always consumed content. We always like stories. There are certain ways, fundamentals about the way that humans engage with content that simply haven't changed. And trying to recognise what has changed and trying to recognise what hasn't changed and what stayed the same is a secret to finding ways of talking to people and engaging with people that really have impact. We hear a lot of talk about Generation X, Generation Y and Z in the space that we work in. You would expect that. And it is worth reflecting on some of the characteristics of these individuals who we're trying to engage with. We take this with a little bit of a pinch of salt, though, because although these are definitely true, that, you know, Gen Z definitely do prefer the visual, not the verbal. They do like the try and see, not the sit and listen. We would argue that actually these sorts of characteristics are starting to become characteristics of the general population, not just these individuals. It's just that they've been a particularly extreme example of that. As all of us get more and more used to the sort of modern consumer experience, which is driven by that instant gratification, that personalization, that automation, that interactivity, that on 24/7, that concept of on demand, so that we can engage with something when we want to engage with it, not when the shops are open. It's what's characterizing all of our consumer experiences. But that consumer landscape, that consumer market, is then having an influence on our expectations from a candidate experience perspective. That's then coupled with the fact that actually candidate experience really matters these days, because actually one disgruntled candidate can do an awful lot of damage, can have a lot of impact. And when you actually look at the stats and you actually think about the disconnect between the investment of time that most employers put into candidate experience, or the amount of credit they give candidate experience, versus the potential impact of getting that candidate experience wrong, it's really fascinating. And I think, you know, I've worked in-house myself for a lot of my career, and I think that's a lot driven by the things that as in-house recruiters we're measured against, which isn't necessarily how happy are your candidates, but more about, you know, your progress in delivering results against budget. And candidate experience at most is a bit of a byline. So what we sort of talk quite a lot about is how important that candidate experience is, and how we feel that that candidate experience, particularly in volume recruitment processes, really does need to come into the forefront, and what you can do about candidate experience, first of all, in order to measure it, and then to turn the dial on that candidate experience. So we talked to start with about making your recruitment process, your volume recruitment process, your early careers recruitment process effective, efficient and engaging. By effective, first of all, it has to do what you need it to do. It needs to find you the right fit talent, so it needs to be valid and predictively effective, and it needs to be reliable and consistent, so it needs to do that on an ongoing basis. So a candidate who applies today has the same chance as the candidate who applies in 5 months' time. So you have that consistency. It also just needs to be practically usable. So when you're looking at the logistics and the realities of your operations, it needs to work. So that's effective, you know, that sort of fundamental basic level. In this modern world as well, where we're all being asked to do more with less, there's also a lot of onus on efficient. So not only does it need to get the right results, but it needs to do it as quickly as possible, with as little resource as possible, and with as little investment as possible. We all know the mandates that we're facing these days. And, you know, these days with technology as an option, that's about finding the right level of appropriate automation. It's about making sure that you're allocating the right resource to the right tasks. But it's also about making sure that you're actually investing effort in the right places, because there are certain things that candidates can do for you or can do for themselves which don't necessarily require intervention. So being intelligent about looking at which parts of your process are owned and managed and delivered by who is really important. And then the final piece, and I guess this is a piece that we feel that not everyone, but a lot of organisations don't put as much emphasis on as perhaps they should, is the engaging piece. Back to this concept of the candidate as the consumer, your candidate as your potential customer. That engaging piece is really important. We believe that a recruitment process should not be awful, should at best be okay, but actually, dare say it could be fun. It could be engaging. Even if you didn't get the job, you could walk away feeling like you've had a positive experience. And that's what we spend a lot of our time working with our clients in order to achieve. So we look at the characteristics of the population we're working with, we look at modern expectations, and we look at the technologies that are available to us, and we think about how can we take candidates on a journey, how can we give them something back from the process even if they don't ultimately get the job. How can we make sure that they walk away from this feeling as positive about our brand as we would like them to do, or as positive about our brand as we'd like them to be if they looked at a piece of marketing, at least as positive as they were before they started the recruitment process, but hopefully even more positive. And we therefore look at anchoring a lot of what we do in principles of gamification. So that's not about making it a game. That's about thinking about the principles behind gamification, what drives that engagement and loyalty, and a sense of flow and fiero that we get through games. And also about getting people into those true moments. So when we're trying to get an authentic assessment, we talk a little about kiosis. So the great thing about an engaging process, when you get people into that sense of, I'm having a lovely time, you reduce the impact of socially desirable responding or learned behaviour, and you start to get a more authentic insight into the individual characters that you're assessing. So we see a recruitment process as a story, as a journey, and we talk an awful lot to our clients about the recruitment process and how you can tell different sections of your story as a candidate progresses, and how you can take candidates through the different levels and unlock access to different information and status as you progress. So hopefully, by the time, whatever stage in the process that candidates get to, they walk away feeling like they've had a really meaningful interaction with you. They've really enjoyed the experience. And on the other side as well, you're using that authenticity to make sure that you're making a really robust hiring decision. Let's talk a little bit about recruitment trends. So you'll see here, we've sort of talked about the broad categories of attraction, process, and onboarding. And a lot of the same concepts go across the attraction and the recruitment process. And I guess, for me, that's one of the strongest trends, or certainly one of the things that we talk to people most about, is seeing your recruitment process as a continuation of that attraction messaging. So you don't attract, stop marketing, and assess. It's about starting the journey or the conversation in the attraction and then continuing the conversation through the recruitment process. And you can do that through the use of interactive video-based tools, game-based assessment tools, match me tools, situational judgment tools, and these sorts of things will help you to actually continue the brand messaging, continue the story that you're telling candidates from the moment that you first engage with them on campus, in schools, through a job advert, through to the moment that they sort of fall out of your recruitment process or receive the job. The other thing that's changed is the way that we can actually interact with people too. There's still definitely a substantial role to be played for that face-to-face event-based interaction. But not all events now need to be physically in person. There's been a huge change introduced by candidate chat platforms, and those candidate chat platforms allow you to actually run virtual events, and so to engage with people in an interactive and engaging manner en masse without having to physically be there, so that you can do more of it. But the point is, those engagements don't need to stop at the start of the recruitment process. They can be part of your attraction, but they can also continue on once you go into the selection process, particularly for those organisations who take diversity really seriously and want to help and make sure that there's a level playing field and that everybody has an equal opportunity to perform. These sorts of platforms can be really helpful for helping people who might have come from more socially disadvantaged backgrounds, who don't have strong commercial role models, understand how they can prepare for the next stage in your selection process, demystify assessment centres, whatever it is that candidates can potentially be concerned about, you can help coach them so that when they actually come into those exercises, you're seeing the best that the candidate has to offer, rather than a delivery or which is influenced by any levels of anxiety or uncertainty. I also talked about the fact that candidate experience these days can be measured. We feel like everybody should be measuring candidate experience because it is so easy to do so, whether it's through net promoter scoring as we do through our ATS, or whether it's through candidate surveys, or literally giving candidates the opportunity to provide feedback at the end of each assessment stage. Once you can quantify something, you can then compare it. And there's a lot of benchmarking data that organisations can use to actually evaluate how their candidate experience compares to others. But more importantly, it can help you understand how the different elements of your selection process compare with each other, and actually how the experience changes over time. Really meaningful, because once you actually understand it, once you can quantify it, you can then do something about it. In terms of the recruitment process, there's obviously an awful lot that automation has introduced, and a lot of opportunity there for people to reinvest the time and resource and then cost that they're saving through the introduction of some more automated tools in the sorts of activities that can really add value to the recruitment process. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So as well as the technology-enabled assessment tools like the video platforms, the situational judgment tests, the paperless assessment centres, there's also an expectation that we will use technology to deliver a greater level of immersion. So going back through to what candidates want, they are used to Amazon reviews, to being able to go and check out their hotel room on TripAdvisor. They're used to be able to see everything before they buy it, try before they buy, and yet in a recruitment process they often feel a little bit blind. They are making arguably the biggest decision of their lives, but they don't truly understand what they're getting into. So the other thing that technology has really enabled us all to do is to just pull back the curtains on the windows and allow graduates and in turns all applicants to have a proper look at what it is that they're signing up to. That's of benefit not just to the candidates in terms of helping them feel like they've had a greater stake or an understanding of the decision they're making, but also obviously to us as well, because if candidates are making more informed and educated decisions, then hopefully they're going to be more likely to stay with us if they do receive the job. There's also, interestingly, in terms of another trend, we're starting to have a lot more conversations about being more proactive with diversity, so a little bit different, not about technology actually these days, but about using the permissions within the Equality Act 2010 in order to be a little bit more aggressive in with regards to certain underrepresented groups within organisations. So I think for the last few years, a lot of the dialogue's been about removal of adverse impact and activity in order to increase the numbers of underrepresented individuals applying to recruitment processes. But despite an awful lot of effort being put into these sorts of activities by organisations, typically we're finding that the dial just hasn't been turned enough, and organisations are being mandated by their boards and they're coming up and saying, what more can we do? And actually there are some fairly bold moves that can be made, and we don't necessarily advocate them, although we can help people introduce them if they are interested in doing so, but where you can actually use positive action and tiebreaker rules in order to accelerate the progression of certain individuals once they do meet your benchmark of expectations. So that's another key trend in the market as well. The other big trend that we're seeing is that organisations' recruitment processes, time to offer is rapidly reducing. So technology automation, allowing candidates to progress at their own will on demand through the front end of the recruitment process, means that many organisations are able to make an offer within as little as 2 weeks, and average time to offer used to be sort of 3 to 6 months in volume recruitment processes. So dramatic shift in that. But what that then means is there's often a much longer period between when somebody's offered and when they actually start working with you. And that in itself, you've solved one problem, you've created another, and how we interact with individuals between that point of offer so that they do actually turn up on day one has also really become an increasing trend. And the same technologies that can help you get through the recruitment process efficiently can often be repurposed for use in that interim period, but making sure that you don't tick the box, say, right, I've hired that person, and then forget about them for the next 6 to 9 months is critical to make sure that all that investment you put in front of finding the right people isn't wasted. So I said I'd talk a little bit more about the choices that organisations now have in terms of efficiencies. So there are certain tasks or activities which within volume recruitment processes are typically a little bit more commoditised. They're the sorts of things that are critical for a positive candidate experience. They need to be done effectively and efficiently, but actually there's a limited opportunity to truly add value through those sorts of tasks. And those are the sorts of tasks that we talk to people about either automating or outsourcing. And the benefit of that is then the time that's saved with recruiters to again reinvest their effort in the places where they can really make a difference. So a lot of what we're doing with organisations at the moment is trying to reduce some effort upfront in terms of the organisational resource input and to reinvest that time towards the latter end of the process. So getting candidates through the front end as quickly, as efficiently and in their control as they want, and then freeing up your recruiters to then engage with individuals once they've been pre-qualified. So once you've got a group of individuals who represent a prima facie fit with your requirements, then making sure that your internal resource invests a lot of time in those individuals with coaching calls before assessment centres, candidate connect calls, sales interventions, to make sure that you're continuing to engage and that you're increasing your chances of those great people converting into offer. Also, to then going back to the piece that often volume recruiters feel they have very little time to do, that piece around continual improvement. The pace of change is so substantial in this space that actually in order to make sure that you're continuing to win in that competitive market, you do need to keep thinking about what next and evolving. Also, there's been so much change, even the reduction in emphasis on academics and things. So these sorts of things actually, for those of us who talk about this day in, day out, feel quite straightforward, we're very familiar with them, but to the business stakeholders, to those senior individuals who probably came through a recruitment process in a very different environment, they need to be brought on that journey too. They need to understand why the candidates who are coming into their assessment centres today might look or seem a little bit different from the ones they're used to seeing. They might need to be educated that although they're the ones telling us what the future talent will look like and that that future need is probably a bit different from yesterday's, when they actually see those individuals, they need reminding of why they're seeing the individuals they're seeing, and reminding that it's what they want, and reminding them that digital intelligence is replacing the need for that absolute academic excellence, and those sorts of messages. So we see automation as an opportunity to have these sorts of conversations with ourselves, to really think about what are the tasks that I can either outsource or automate that don't add ultimate value but need to happen really well, really efficiently, and actually where potentially automation can do things better than a human being. And what are the things that actually really do still need that human touch? So we see the sort of opportunity for automation and human intervention to coexist, and we think that's really critical. So we tend to talk a little bit about the spectrum for automation, and to say that although we think there's a real place for automation in volume recruitment for all the original points that I mentioned, not all automation is automatically good, and there is a spectrum within automation. Some things which are really just simple logic based, and other things out there which are complex machine learning, natural language processing, complex algorithms, big data, this sort of stuff, which feels more complex. I say the more complex doesn't automatically equal more sophisticated or better. Doesn't mean it isn't either. But you need to think really carefully when you're looking at automation about why you're introducing that particular technology and what its purpose is. When you introduce automation, when you introduce new technology, when it's done really well, it can introduce efficiency, it can actually make things feel much more personalised for candidates, it can give candidates a greater sense of control, it can reduce bias, and it can reduce cost. But if you get it wrong, you can reinforce some of those biases, it can feel really impersonal, and it actually can be more costly. So when we're talking about automation, what we tend to say to people is, think about a few key principles. Think about trying to create an experience for a candidate where they feel in control. So if you think about neuroscience, you think about the SCARF principles, helping candidates feel that they've got an equal sense of status and that they've got an element of control is really important. So anything that helps candidates get an on-demand experience or that feels really candidate-led, that's fantastic. Anything that takes recruiter time out of commoditized tasks and enables them to reinvest time in more value-add tasks, that's fantastic as well. Anything that gives a greater realistic job preview that enriches the candidate experience, that's great. And, of course, the other great benefit of a lot of the technology is that we can give something back to the candidates more easily these days, so we can introduce aspects of feedback in a way that just wasn't feasible before technology helped us with that. So, final slide for me, just to sort of to sum up and make some particular recommendations for those of you who truly want to do as we recommend and make your process as effective, efficient and engaging as possible. So, do embrace new technologies. Do embrace opportunities for digital assessment, for candidate chat. Think about digital onboarding. Look at these technologies and the opportunities they give you to truly assess potential. So in the past, a lot of the selection methodologies, the reality of the lack of technology-enabled assessment methodologies meant that we did have to over-rely on things like academics or previous experience. These days, we don't necessarily need to. There are automated assessment tools which are behaviourally anchored and allow us to assess the candidate in the whole, rather than just over-indexing on narrow cognitive aspects or previous experience or academic achievement. So there really is a lot of opportunity for potential assessment that exists today and didn't exist just a few years ago. The fact that we highly advocate the use of appropriate technology means that doesn't mean that we say remove the human touch. We think that human touch is still absolutely critical, particularly with the early careers populations that we're talking about. Just make sure that you use it at the right point and the efficient point. Go back to the point I made previously, it's very easy these days to measure candidate impact or candidate experience, measure it and then act on it. And then use the opportunities to truly give candidates the feedback that they deserve and give them the opportunity to actually learn from any interaction. So regardless of whether they're successful or not through your process, they walk away feeling like it was a worthwhile investment of their time. I think when I talk about a lot of these things, I often hear people say, oh, that's all very well, but we haven't got a lot of money. That's easy for big organisations to do. We have got small budgets. And I guess what I would say is that these things truly don't have to be expensive at all. And actually a lot of this automation does mean that you can cut costs. one of the most high-profile campaigns that we did for Unilever. People always look at it and go, wow, that's easy for Unilever. That's really expensive. We couldn't possibly do that. They actually saved over £1 million in the first year by doing it. That was even taking into account the investment they needed to make to drive the change. So there is an awful lot of opportunity, even for organisations on a bit of a budget, to make sure that they truly can deliver an excellent experience, so that I guess our hope is that all students going through recruitment processes have a fair experience, the best possible opportunity to demonstrate their capability, and walk out of those processes feeling that regardless of the outcome, they've invested their time wisely and they've had a positive interaction with the organisations they've engaged with. Okay, thank you all very much. Hope you all get home safely.